This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
You probably heard the saying, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? You know, I've thought about that over the last few days when it comes to AEW. It's been radio silent on this channel about any of the television products since Punk left. And as I sit here recording today, even right now, what's all the talk been about? Where's Punk gonna go? What's going on with The Rock? Are WWE setting the seeds for an early WrestleMania build? How does that affect plans or change course of direction for Cody? I mean, it's weird. Like, I don't want to try and claim that Tony Khan has just conceded defeat. But I think he's at least well aware enough of the niche product that he's created for himself and the company as a whole. Like all those WWE references they used to make. Trying to find any possible way to be a poor man's carbon copy of sports entertainment wrestling. Now they're just embracing the outlaw wrestling. I mean, where are we now? 3 weeks removed from the Punk firing? What have people been buzzing about? What is the appeal with AEW? Okay, so Bryan Danielson's back. So what? He's been a non-factor on that show since the night they decided not to switch the belt onto him during the Adam Page title program. That was like, what, 2 years ago? Think about it this way. What is the money match they're promoting? Samoa Joe and MJF? Well, probably a good idea on paper. How is that going to spark interest in casual fans or even disenfranchised AEW fans that wanted a real viable alternative to WWE that wasn't just a watered-down sports entertainment product? I mean, I've said it before. They completely killed MJF for me. The stuff they did with him and Adam Cole over the summer, that was trash. And I don't care what people say, what it did for the numbers or the ratings. If Adam Cole and MJF doing a dance-off in the middle of a sanctioned match is the only thing generating eyeballs on the product right now, then what does that say about the state of AEW? The fact that bad outlaw comedy is the only thing that keeps people's attention. Or terribly produced skits with Cole and MJF hanging out at trampoline parks. Who would actually want to watch that? Aside from the die-hard marks that would watch no matter what. I mean, I already had one foot out the door with AEW for a long time. Months leading up to that. But between that and the Punk termination, that was all I needed. And now that we're in the afterbirth of all that drama, well, the backstage news has certainly died down. Now they're just sort of back to feeding people the same crap they've been feeding them for months. A wordless Wednesday night show where they struggle to keep more than half the audience for the full 2 hours. And a Saturday show that's now doing worse numbers than ever before. Now that Punk's gone. The one guy on that show that consistently delivered and gave people incentive to come back. Well, he's not there now. So who's the main draw? Nobody, I guess. Hence why they're now doing the numbers they're doing. I don't know. What I do know, however, is that the new Friday format is much easier for me to put together. Not only are we talking about classic wrestling, but the shows that are actually worth my time and attention. And they usually don't piss me off. Except for that one thing on Crockett TV, which I'll talk about momentarily. But welcome one and all to the Five Starr Wrestling Report. Subscribe, comment, like the show. Come back and check us out on Rumble and YouTube. YouTube and Rumble. It's weird saying it the other way. But we're here every Monday and Friday for new shows. We've made some slight modifications to the channel now that we've cut ties with AEW. So in addition to the newly added Mid-South review series, we also have the classic NXT review series on the Monday show. If you're a fan of classic content, then this will definitely be the show for you. If not, well, we also review SmackDown. So you get your fix of modern wrestling in there as well. I mean, I've been down on that show for a long time too, but after last week, they surely gave me more than a few reasons to come back and check the show out. Before The Rock's return, there wasn't much. Whatever scraps were left of the bloodline, plus LA Knight. But now things are starting to heat up again as we're approaching Survivor Series and eventually Rumble season. So the excitement level is kicking in. Kind of like how the excitement level is kicking in for the NWA as we close in on Starrcade 87, which is not too far off from where we are now. And this episode of Crockett TV was kind of cool, getting out of our comfort zone a little bit. We were not in the TBS studios in Atlanta. We were at the Dorton Arena in Raleigh, North Carolina, which I think we've seen a Saturday show on the Superstation from the Dorton Arena. May have been during last year's Bash Tour. I mean, it's always cool when we get to see the shows from the big arenas. Packed houses with fans filling up virtually every seat. It's always an electric environment. It's also amusing because I keep forgetting that this is the 80s. So the fans are out there camera bombing Tony Schiavone on the floor while he's trying to run down the card. It's just, I don't know. It's one of those things. Grown-ass adults acting like third-grade children on camera just to show their face in the frame for like 3 seconds. You know, it was before people had cameras on their phones, so people were goofy back then. Like, you never see that kind of stuff today. At least not compared to how it used to be in the 80s and the 90s. Oh, just wait until the Monday Night Wars. God, the fans were always the highlight. We'll talk about the two big featured matches this week. Figuring they were in Raleigh, you had to know they were going to put together a bigger card than what we're used to seeing. The first thing we saw this week was the Barbarian versus Colt Steele in progress. Colt Steele. If Colt Cabana and Ace Steel combined their names and formed a tag team, that is what their name would be. Colt Steele. I bet you CM Punk would approve. So, well, this was odd. I don't know if it's because they were in front of a hotter crowd. Maybe they felt obligated to give Colt Steele something in this match. I expected a total bar-bearing onslaught. Turns out it wasn't. They had a technically sound professional wrestling match. The Barbarian. He's just in there working over Colt Steele in holds. At one point, he had Colt locked in a sharpshooter, a move that would kill the average man. had that hold been applied by the Barbarian. Not cold steel. No, this man fought through the pain. He would not give up. And while Barbarian is in there working him over in chin locks and other mat holds, Cold Steel begins to fire up, and he's trying to get some energy brewing so he can make his big comeback. Again, I remind you, Cold Steel, the babyface in peril in this match. Most fans would never be able to pick the guy out of a police lineup, yet for some reason, they let this guy be the one to fire a comeback on the Barbarian. Didn't matter, though, because Barbarian no-sold all the punches and then killed him with a diving headbutt like a minute later. Couldn't just massacre the guy in 15 seconds. No, they were in North Carolina, damn it. Thousands of rabid screaming fans in attendance. Got to at least give the job fella something to work with. But that was all just mainly a buffer before we got into the first of the two main event matches this week. For the United States Heavyweight Championship, two former friends, two former colleagues, if you will. It is Lex Luger defending against Western States Heritage Champion Barry Windham. And again, the difference between watching a match like this in the Atlanta studio versus getting to experience it in front of a packed house in Raleigh, not even close to try to compare them. I mean, the fan reactions alone took this from like a solid 4 to about a solid 7 or 8, just on the match scale. You know, it's one of those things. Barry was the beloved babyface. Luger was the hated villain. So anytime Barry had Luger in control, anytime Luger took a fucking bump, these people went insane. And keep in mind, this is one of the core members of the Horsemen. In North Carolina, of all places. Flair country. I mean, the Horsemen have been super over with the majority of the fans in the Carolinas since they first formed as a group. Not on this night. These people were purely behind Barry Windham. Of course, they're both in there working their asses off the whole time. You know, it's awesome when you see guys paired together like this as opponents in 87, knowing where things would end up about 4 or 5 months out from now when both guys would kind of do the double turn. Meanwhile, here they are in September of the previous year. It's like they've been feuding for the last 8 years with the way that people are going crazy for it. I did like at one point here. Barry manages to catch Luger in a belly-to-belly, trying to escape the bear hug predicament. And of course, it was an homage to Magnum. And when Luger kicks out a 2, Tony Schiavone says, and I quote, "I can't believe he kicked out of the belly-to-belly." And I thought about it for a minute. And I was like, yeah, I guess that was almost unheard of at the time. The idea of somebody in Crockett Promotions kicking out of a suplex. You know, back when finishers were protected. People didn't kick out of everything in the book. And, well, like I said, they're having this really heated back and forth match, and they're closing in on the 15-minute mark when Barry finally goes up top and hits Luger with a really good-looking missile dropkick. Why the hell wasn't that Barry's finish? Instead of the lariat. That was a sick-looking dropkick. But of course, JJ throws Luger's foot under the bottom rope to cause a break. And of course, Barry goes after JJ on the floor. I always love the way JJ would casually sell after getting involved. Like he just tries to walk it off like nothing happened. And when the babyface spins him around and clocks him with the right hand, JJ's got the "oh shit" expression on his face. Gets me every time. And eventually that brings out Arn to try to help JJ to the back. But who should be out there to kick him out from ringside but Earl Hebner? And while Luger and Barry are trading at the end, Well, I honestly don't know what the fuck happened here. The idea, I think, was for Arn to trip Barry in the ropes while Arn was walking past the ring to go to the back. Someone was out of position here because on top of Barry just sort of lumbering over to the ground like he blew out his knee, Luger also just kind of stumbled and fell forward. I don't know if Luger tripped or if he just saw that Arn wasn't in position to grab Barry's ankle, so he tried to call an audible on the spot. In any case, everyone just sort of fell over as Luger went to crawl over for the cover. And as Tommy's about to count the 3, Hebner stops him, and he draws attention to Arn picking the leg. So, as per usual with a lot of 1980s wrestling, Tommy Young takes Earl's word for it. Because, the Horsemen are heels. So naturally, Tommy is inclined to believe that they would cheat in a situation like this. So, he disqualifies Luger and awards the match to Barry. I just love that idea. The fact that, I don't need a fucking replay. Arn had no business being out there anyway. So if Hebner's telling me the guy interfered, I believe him. It was also funny during the post-match. The Horsemen get some of their heat back with Luger hoisting Barry up into the torture rack, and then the Rock and Roll Express run down to send Luger and Arn packing. And even though Barry's on the ground selling his back, Tommy Young still has to run over and raise his arm as to say, "Your winner!" As if that should be Tommy's primary concern at the time. This guy's back is totally fucked. But we gotta let the people know he won the match. Not the title, but he did win the match. So that was all great. And then we come back with Luger and JJ recapping what just went down. JJ talking about how if Ricky and Robert don't start minding their own business, then Tully and Arn are going to give him a receipt that they'll never forget. And on top of the fact that I noted this man was glistening from head to toe, sweat just pouring down every orifice of this man's body. And while Luger's talking about the prestige of the U.S. title, I believe his exact quote was, "I have elevated the U.S. heavyweight title to an elevation never seen before." Indeed, he may have. The other thing I got out of this, more of J.J. Dillon just being fucking great at his job. Luger's talking about how when he gets Dusty up in the rack, there's no way he can apply a sleeper hold from that position. And JJ, right on cue, chiming in with the following, or an illegal chokehold. And Luger immediately corrects himself and calls it a chokehold. He tried to give Dusty credit, but JJ was right there to remind him, no, it is not a sleeper, it is a chokehold. Because he's a heel, and he lies. J.J. Dillon, the expert in the art of subtlety. So from there, we go back to the ring for our next bout. Coming off the red-hot Luger-Wyndham match a few minutes prior. I guess they decided, oh, now would be a good time to kill the crowd and bore them to tears. How about a George South versus Ivan Koloff match? When I tell you, this may have been the longest 2 minutes I've ever experienced watching a match before. I don't think I'm exaggerating. For 120 full seconds, I watched Ivan grab George South. He would hit a move. He would pick him back up. He would hit a move. Pick him up again. Hit another move. Literally for 2 straight minutes. Not even like he was hitting him with exciting moves. I'm talking things such as a boot to the chest, or a headbutt, or a clubbing blow to the back of the neck. And while Ivan had George in control, fast forward to the last 20 seconds, he decided to choke George with the Russian chain because, well, again, he's a heel. So even when Ivan is in full control of the match, has the guy dead to rights, he must cheat. And then he hit the middle rope sickle for the pin. Appallingly boring, I wrote. You know what wasn't appallingly boring? Was the video package they aired for Ron Garvin. Now, the whole premise here was that he is glory-bound for the NWA World's Heavyweight title. So Tony pitched the video by saying, we're going to look to see what makes Ron Garvin tick. At which point, we basically just got a highlight reel of Ron Garvin, plus some training footage. I mean, at first I thought the entire video was just going to be watching clips of him swimming in a lake and jogging on the back roads, because that went on for like a full minute. And then they showed him training in his private gym, doing a lot of heavy weights and big machinery. And that in and of itself was fine. I wasn't quite clear on what exactly the thing was that made Ron Garvin tick per se, other than his passion and drive to become the world's champion by going through extensive training. What made this video great was that they had to dub in some artificial music to avoid copyright claims. So of all things to filter in order to whet our appetite to see Ron Garvin pursue Ric Flair and become the new world's champion, apparently the best kind of music they could plug in was what I can merely best describe as something straight out of a 1950s porno. I wish I were joking. It was, well, I'll say this. There was something incredibly uncomfortable as a heterosexual male as I'm watching Ron Garvin train with heavy weights while they're methodically being sure to film all the sweat coming off his body. Basically, all he's wearing is a tank top and short shorts. Meanwhile, they've got slow tenor saxophone sex music playing in the background as I'm seeing a visual close-up of Ron Garvin's legs. Very unsettling. I'm not sure what the mood was they were going for here, but I was not turned on. And then they immediately go back to the ring for a Jimmy Valiant squash with Tommy Angel, where he won with the elbow drop in like 30 seconds. This was also joined in progress, I guess because they were pressed for time during a Jimmy Valiant squash, of all things. Yes, we had to cut time somewhere on the show. Let's remove 10 seconds of a 40-second squash with Jimmy Valiant. That'll save us some time. Just kind of pointless filler leading into this Dusty Rhodes promo afterwards. He's out there with Tony talking about how he's done with all the Horsemen's sneak attacks. He's done watching as the Horsemen continually interfere in matches and cost the babyface wins. To which I noted, it has taken Dusty until September of 1987 to get fed up. Where has he been for the last 18 months? This is not a newfound concept. The Horsemen have been doing this shit since day one. So anyway, he calls out Luger for a fight. And once Arn and Luger start making their way down the aisleway, this is the point where Dusty calls out Nikita and the Rock and Roll for backup. As you would expect, Arn and Luger are not stupid, so they do not engage in a 4-on-2 advantage babyface circumstance. So they take a powder, and Dusty assures that from now on, there will not be any more Horseman mass beatdowns. From this point forward, it will now be 4-on-4, or 3-on-3, or 2-on-2. Again, I ask, it has taken Dusty this long to settle on that idea? He just now figured it out? That the Horseman's game plan is numbers advantage? Talk about being behind the 8-ball. I should point out, too, during that whole angle, Sean Royal was just kind of casually standing out on the floor with his hands on his hips. At first, I thought he was scheduled to work a match, and Dusty just kind of stole his thunder, which would not have been shocking. But, no. Not only was he not scheduled to wrestle, but he was scheduled to cut a nonsensical promo for about 30 seconds at ringside. A quarterly physical update, as Sean noted. And between the 15 million voice cracks and the fact that I had no idea what the fuck he was talking about, I did not write anything down here. I think he said 2 weeks until Chris Champion comes back and the New Breed reform as a tag team. Yes, the New Breed is coming back. Can't fucking wait. And then we had a Jimmy Garvin versus John Savage match. Totally nothing happening squash. Garvin won with a brainbuster in like a minute. Which brings us into hour 2, as we lead in with Nikita Koloff and Dave Isley for the World Television title. A significant downgrade from the last time we saw Nikita defend the belt on TV. He went from Beautiful Bobby to David Isley. I believe the highest compliment we got from Tony was an inexperienced man with a lot of guts. So, of course, Nikita wiped the floor with him and beat him with a sickle in like a minute. More importantly, however, was the footage we got afterwards with Eddie Gilbert and Terry Taylor, the current UWF World's Television Champion. I believe we saw them air this video last week, but just for clarification on what's going on here, after Terry had knocked off Shane Douglas to become the new TV champion, he and Gilbert made it abundantly clear that there can only be one World's Television Champion. So Nikita can either put up or shut up to prove that he's a fighting champion, to which Nikita got a chance to respond this week. He says that he spent the last few days going through Terry Taylor footage because, and this is almost a direct quote taken from Nikita's mouth, he want to see what Terry do good and what Terry do bad. Gotta love broken English. But he tells everybody that he's been trying to get Jim Crockett to drum up a contract, and whenever Terry has the guts to sign on the dotted line, Nikita will be there so they can have their little showdown to see who the real one true champion is. A title unification match, without directly referring to it as such, but that's pretty much what it would become. And then we came back for a Ric Flair promo. Moreover, a total stream of consciousness Ric Flair promo. He's out there with Tony running down Ron Garvin. And then somehow, completely on a whim, no subtle transition, he begins ripping into Nikita Koloff and Terry Taylor, which I guess was somewhat timely, considering Flair and Taylor had worked together previously in Mid-South like 2 years prior. So they had history. They were not strangers in the ring to one another. But, it was more or less your typical style and profile Flair promo. Suit jacket came off. Talked about limousines and Space Mountain. Something about the NWA coming to Las Vegas, which he was very stoked about. Probably because he knew there'd be a lot of partying and drinking Good Lord, Ric Flair in Las Vegas. I hope to God they capture that on camera. We need to see that aired live. The entire Superstation program could just be 2 straight hours of Ric Flair partying in Las Vegas. It'd be the best episode of all time. Fuck the wrestling. Just give me Ric Flair having a good time. So anyway, he finished by running down Ron Garvin again and calling him classless. At which point, we go back to the ring for our second featured match on this week's Superstation. The main event of the program, with basically 40 minutes of airtime left. And, well, you heard me allude to it a while ago. Got a lot to say about this debacle. Sucks too, because I was really looking forward to it when Tony announced it at the top of the program. And then we got the actual match. It is a no disqualification, anything goes, no rules match for the NWA World Tag Team Championships. The Rock and Roll Express defending against Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson. Now, before I proceed further, I want you to make a mental note of that. The Rock and Roll Express versus Tully and Arn in a no DQ match for the World Tag Team Championships for free on TV. How do you make that match suck? Well, I will explain. I guess the first question right out of the gate, why exactly no DQ? To my recollection, I don't think these guys ever faced off previously. At least, not in this tag team combination of Tully and Arn. We've seen the Rock and Roll wrestle the Horsemen, but this one was a new idea. And I'm not exactly sure why it was no DQ. I figure it was one of those things where they just play it off like maybe no one will ask. Put a paperclip on the no DQ thing because you'll hear me refer back to that at least 1,000 times during this match. I'm not entirely convinced the boys remembered it was no disqualification. Because for a match that essentially had no rules, they were definitely following the regular rules of tag team wrestling. Even Tully and Arn were adhering to the one-man in, one-man out routine. Second thing I noted here. Oh my God, Robert Gibson's hair. What the fuck happened? Was his hair starting to thin even back then? Or did someone just royally fuck up the buzz cut on the sides of the mullet? It looked horrible. You know, I think when all is said and done, if you were to ask me to give a brief overview of this match in like 1 or 2 sentences, here's what I would tell you. As a regular standard tag team match for the belts, this was a very good match. As a no disqualification, anything goes, no rules, false count anywhere match for the belts, this may have been the most feckless, ineffective no DQ match of all time. Now, I think it's important to lay the groundwork here for what a no DQ match is, in case anybody was wondering. It's not as complex as it sounds. The premise of a no DQ match is that there are no DQs. Therefore, the referee cannot throw the match out whenever the wrestlers break the rules. At least hypothetically, if he's a competent official that knows what he's doing. So, of course, the obvious question, why are the boys standing on the ring apron? Shouldn't the entire match be tornado rules? One would think. Probably the single biggest thing that annoyed me here, it was actually one specific spot, but it was enough to leave my blood boiling. Okay, so I'm jumping ahead here. This happens at about the midway mark. There's a point where they're working over Arn's leg, and Ricky's got Arn in some type of modified figure four, and they're close enough to the heel corner to where Arn can reach out and sort of tag Tully's hand. The problem, however, is that Tully reached his hand through the middle rope to make the tag. It was not an over-the-top rope tag, aka a legal tag. Therefore, Tommy Young waves off the call, and he forces Tully to go back out onto the ring apron, to which Tully complies. As Tony Schiavone says, and I quote, "You must hold the tag rope properly before entering the match as the legal partner." Why? Seriously, why? Did we forget to mention the part that this match is no disqualification? The fuck does it matter whether or not Tully tags over the top rope or not? Or whether he's actually holding the tag rope? What's Tommy Young gonna do? Well, legally speaking, in the context of this match, nothing. You can't throw the match out. Tully should have kicked him in the balls, told him to go pound sand. Why not? It's not like he could have been disqualified for it. You know, guys are dumping each other over the top rope nonstop here. Tommy Young didn't have a problem with that. What would normally be grounds for a DQ in a normally sanctioned NWA match. But even in this tag team match with no rules, nope, still had to properly tag in and out. By far the highlight of this match. And I think this is the point where Tully just got fed up with all this bullshit and finally called out the official for being an idiot. There's a point past the 15-minute mark. Arn is choking Robert in the ropes. And Tommy Young gets down and he starts going, 1, 2, 3. Finally, Tully just shouts at the top of his lungs, not even trying to hide it at this point. This is in like plain view of the floor cam. He just goes, "It's no DQ, halfwit." I mean, I burst out laughing. I was like, Tully is so done. They've completely lost the plot in this match. Like, is it no DQ or not? No one fucking knows. It sucks too because if you think about it, the match was really good outside the fact that nobody knew what the rules were. If they would have just removed that whole stipulation, this would have been a classic. Because even in the cases where the heels were cheating, like the parts where Arn is using the tag rope to choke out the baby faces, but he's trying to conceal the gimmick, I just can't help but scream, why is he hiding it? He doesn't need to. Again, it's probably the smart fan of me talking, but it was incredibly frustrating. I just couldn't get into anything they did here. I did kind of laugh at the part where Arn goes to throw Ricky over the top rope to the floor. Not only does Ricky land on his feet, but then he casually walks over to grab a folding chair, and as he slides it back into the ring, Tommy Young just looks at him and goes, "Come on, man, really? Do you really need that chair?" To which Ricky looks at him and goes, "You're probably right, Tommy." And then he just tosses the chair out of the ring. Now that was at least mildly humorous. Even in a no DQ match, where the Rock and Roll Express are free to use weapons as they please. They couldn't do it. They could not lower themselves to using weapons in a match to win. Too much pride. Now those are some white meat babyfaces right there. They would never betray the fans. Of course, I'm trying to enjoy the match for what it is, but the fact that nobody understood the formatting of the match just kept pissing me off. I mean, everyone's out there sweating profusely and working their butts off. The action's awesome. All the while, I can't get over this dumbass stipulation. Especially with the way it factors into the finish here. And this above all else. This fucking finish. It just sent me over the edge. This is where I was fully convinced that Tommy Young had no earthly idea this match was no DQ. Because you talk about bullshit calls. This was a fucking bullshit call. They do the inadvertent ref bump, where Ricky accidentally backhands Tommy in the face, and he goes down selling for a minute. Meanwhile, the Rock and Roll hit their double drop kick on Arn, and they go for the visual pin. And here comes Tully in the back door to pull Roberts out to the floor, and he goes over and clocks Ricky in the back of the head with JJ's loafer. And as he rolls Arn out to the ring apron, Tully then turns over Ricky to pin his shoulders down. Tommy Young sees this, and he makes the slow crawl over, and he goes 1, 2, 3. And I noted here, well, at least the BS no DQ stipulation factored into the finish after all. Oh no, I was wrong. Because for the second straight occasion on this one show, Earl fucking Hebner, the bane of my existence, he goes in there to wave off the call and explain to senior official Tommy Young that the heels cheated. The second time this happened on one program. They literally just did this finish for the Barry Luger match. Less than an hour prior. Now they do the exact same thing in the main event. And of course, just like what happened earlier, well, I mean, I can at least give it a free pass in that case because it made sense there. But here, it did not make sense for them to do that finish because apparently nobody clued Hebner into the fact that this tag match, not sure if I mentioned this yet, but maybe I should throw it out there for context. It is fucking no disqualification. So what happens? Well, you'll never guess. Tommy Young waves off the call. The match continues. He restarted a tag match because the heels cheated by using a gimmick on the babyfaces to score a pinfall in a match that already had no rules to begin with. I wish I were making that up. But that was a thing that happened. Oh, but there's more. Because if you thought that was dumb, wait until you hear what the actual finish was. This was straight out of the Russo playbook. So the match has been restarted, and both teams begin brawling, and it bleeds out into the crowd with all four men going at it. At this point, the visual is just absurd because we see the cameraman filming from the aisleway, but he's not like in the aisleway. He's like right within the barricades as to try to not get like in the middle of all the fans. And on top of the fact that he's filming this in a sea of rabid fans who are constantly getting in the way of the shot, all you see in the distance are four small little blimps throwing what appear to be punches. I can't even call them silhouettes. They look like 4 little small dots in the background. And surrounding all that, it is a black vortex of darkness. There's no lighting back there. There's no stage crew that's moving the lights over so you can actually see what the hell's going on. This goes on for at least 3 minutes. I have no idea what the fuck is happening or how anybody can track it. And finally, as Ricky and Robert begin making their way back, they now have possession of the tag belts because the Horsemen tried to walk off with them. So they reclaim the titles and they're on their way back to the ring. And that is the point where the bell rings. And I'm sitting there dumbfounded and thinking to myself, wait a minute. Did they just ring the bell for some kind of artificial time limit draw? I mean, I guess they ran out of TV time, which, okay. So it goes down in the record books as a no contest. That's still bullshit. But I can at least understand it. Oh, how I was wrong again. No, turns out it was not a time limit draw. Rather, it was a double count out. Let me repeat this again, because I know I've been a little scrambled here with trying to recap this calamity, just so we're on the same page with all this. A double count out finish in a no disqualification tag team match. Excuse me? Have you ever heard anything so ludicrous before? I couldn't believe it. That was their finish. That was how they ended this 40-minute clusterfuck. I sat through 40 minutes of the worst no DQ match of all time just to get to a finish after the match had already been restarted, by the way. You give me a double count out? Fuck you. I honestly can't remember the last time I've ever seen anything like this. This was a 5-star quality tag match with a negative 5-star finish. There was no middle ground. An absolute shit finish to what otherwise would have been a great tag match with 4 great workers. I was floored by all of this. I couldn't believe this actually happened. This was the tipping point. This was it. This is where it was all downhill for Crockett. This one match. I lost sleep over this. How in the world could they screw this up so badly? I could not believe how horribly they botched this. An epic failure of a main event by every sense of the word. These Raleigh fans got fucked. I'd have demanded a refund. No joke. What do they call that kind of heat? The X-Pac heat? Disgusting heat. That's what this was. This finish. This was not, oh, I want to see the Rock and Roll get their comeuppance on Tully and Arn. This was, I never want to see this match again. A no DQ tag match where the match is restarted because the heels cheated to win in a match with no rules, just so the real finish could be a double countout. Fuck. I'll never give Russo shit again. Of all the bad finish concepts he came up with. No, Russo's earned some brownie points with me. This was an all-time terrible finish. I don't care what anybody says. It's a shame they went out like that. You know, Ricky Morton down there doing the promo afterwards saying that the Horsemen couldn't beat them and everybody knows it. To which I said, they just did, you dope. We saw it. On camera. Totally pin your shoulders to the mat. Weapon usage or not, we saw it. God. I don't even want to harp on it anymore. This match ruined me. I'm not even going to give you overall thoughts on the show. I mean, up until the main event, it was moderately decent. But the main event, holy shit, that main event. Dreadful. Absolutely dreadful. All right, then. It is now officially week 2 of our Mid-South Review series. And it's all but confirmed. This show is a million times better than Dynamite. Why I waited until this year to hold off on it, I have no clue. Against my better judgment. But, yeah, this show is much easier to sit through. And it's not just because of the hour runtime. I mean, you heard me talk about it before. Even Dynamite at 2 hours seems like a lifetime. These shows, they just fly right by. Probably one of the easiest wrestling programs to watch. I'm never bored. There's never any downtime. They always keep the show flowing. It's great. Definitely going to be an added bonus to the channel. At least when it comes to my mental health. So in our first edition we recapped last week, we had some major story development involving the Decoy Mr. Wrestling 2. And they were about 3 or so weeks into that storyline where Wrestling 2 had caught wind that somebody was mimicking him in the Mid-South region. So he flew over to Shreveport to see what was going on. Turns out the fake Mr. Wrestling 2 was not distorted reality. And last week was a very story-driven program. And we kind of talked about how Mid-South would go through rotations during their tapings. Some shows would be very wrestling-heavy, others more promo, angle, or story-driven. This one, I would say, kind of fell into the former category. Although we did get a hype package right from the top of the show. This week it was Boyd Pierce and Bill Watts on commentary. What would amount to usually being the main A-list set of commentators. Sometimes Bill would be on assignment and they would throw somebody else in there to do commentary with Boyd, but I mean, Bill Watts is always the best one. And of course, JR shows up a couple years later and he ends up replacing Watts full-time as a regular. And he and Boyd ended up meshing really well together too. But the hype package they aired this week was for Kamala, who at this point had not debuted in the Mid-South region. He was already a relatively newcomer to Memphis when he had debuted earlier that year. That was where he had met with Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler to come up with the original idea for the Ugandan Giant, Ugandan Warrior gimmick. I forget, I think it started off as Ugandan Giant. Later, I think, would become Ugandan Warrior. And actually, if you recall, a little bit of crossover from our world-class reviews. The video they aired here, I believe, was the exact same video they aired in World Class like 2 years ago. It's basically the voiceover saying Kamala like 14,000 times and talking about all his credentials, the 6'9", 385-pound stature. And meanwhile, you get the visuals of him running through the fields with a giant spear, breaking the fourth wall a little bit here. If I'm not mistaken, I think they actually filmed this on Jerry Jarrett's property in Memphis. I love the dramatic use of the fog machine, just to give it some extra flavor. Because that's something you would totally expect to see in the middle of a fucking farm in broad daylight. Giant mass of fog creeping up through the grass. Yeah, that made sense. I mean, the video itself was campy, but, I've always talked about how much I dug the Kamala gimmick. That wasn't until Vince got a hold of him in the WWF and completely ruined him. Made him a cartoon babyface. Just totally killed the mystique. But the thing about Kamala was that he had longevity in the business. When you take into account all the places he wrestled and worked for in that gimmick, like where was he? Memphis, Mid-South, Dallas, WWF, WCW. Was he ever in Florida at any point? Can't remember. I mean, he bounced around a lot. It's really cool seeing what they were able to milk out of the character for a long stretch of time. Probably look at a gimmick like that and think, well, that doesn't have a long shelf life, but they got a lot of mileage out of it. And Watts said that he would be arriving in Mid-South in 2 weeks. So buckle up, boys. Skandar Akbar is bringing in the heavy guns. Oops. I just spoiled who was managing him. My bad. Well, with that, let's go to the ring for our opener this week. Hacksaw Duggan versus Jesse Barr. No Reese or Bowden this week, by the way. He was out on assignment. Actually, I think Watts just said he was on vacation. Which is a bummer. I always enjoy Milquetoast Reeser. He's the kind of low-energy ring announcer that I need in my life occasionally. A stark contrast to fucking Justin Roberts. I'll tell you that much. Or that girl WWE hires where she practically belches out the wrestlers' names. I don't know. Some people like the whole pomp and circumstance thing. I liked it better in the business when the ring announcers didn't sound like they were trying to give themselves a hernia. But that's just me. Important note here, since we're on the subject of Hacksaw Duggan. Still a heel by this point in 82. He and DiBiase were still working that heel pairing together. We were not quite at wacky babyface Hacksaw Duggan yet. We'll slowly see that progression over time. Pretty short, concise match. Duggan gave Barr a little bit of brief shine early on, but Duggan cut him off. He hit the ropes to connect with the tackle spear. And then he basically hit him with a series of weak-looking Oklahoma stampedes in the corner for the 3 count. It was really weird, tying that together with the next squash here. It's Ted DiBiase versus Johnny Rich. And Duggan and DiBiase have been a pretty established duo on television by now. I can't remember if they've explicitly named them as the Rat Pack yet. Because I know Matt Bourne eventually comes in and they introduce him as the third guy. But he got Ted as the North American champion at the time. Last week they showed the footage of a Duggan DiBiase versus JYD Mr. Olympia tag title match where the heels initially won the belts by cheating, but the match was overturned. A lot of story follow-up during this little match here, and this was something that Watts was really great at, was knowing how to tie loose ends together and keep the people up to speed on the important notes in the top feuds. I liked how Watts mentioned the history between DiBiase and Tommy Rich, which Johnny Rich's brother, for anybody that didn't know. I believe that was in reference to their work in Georgia Championship Wrestling, but that was a nice touch. The bulk of the conversation was dealt around DiBiase and JYD. That was how DiBiase won the North American title to begin with, so they're being sure to keep that at the top of the pecking order in terms of discussion. Overall, the match was fine. DiBiase went to the gimmick glove, so DiBiase slipped the fake gimmick into the glove and gave him the knockout blow for the 3 count. I did note here that Johnny Rich managed to somehow find a way to screw up a bridging roll-through And by that, I mostly mean he rolled DiBiase onto his back, and when he tried to lock the hands around his waist, he's just sort of let go. Don't really know what happened there, but DiBiase just kind of got up and immediately took the match home. So maybe that was a judgment call. So then we come back for a pretty cool little TV story for the week. I always liked when Mid-South would occasionally do these episodic TV angles or storylines to keep things fresh. So Skandar Akbar and General Buck Robley were scheduled to work separate singles matches this week. And because Akbar is willing to put his money where his mouth is, he's offering, as he put it here, $1,000 bills totaling $1,000. I was like, holy shit, the General can do basic math. Who'd have thunk it? And the steps were as follows. Whoever could beat their opponent in a faster time would get the purse. Even though the General hasn't wrestled on TV in a hot minute, he's still willing to sacrifice his money to do so because he's a betting man. So, of course, they send out poor Tim Horner to be the sacrificial lamb. To tell you the truth, Horner was probably the superior worker here, and all he did was sell for like 90% of the match. I mean, by this point, Akbar only wrestled full-time for like maybe another year or two before he was done. You just watch him in this 2-minute match alone. I mean, it's obvious he didn't have much left in the tank anymore. There was a spot here, and again, I don't even know who was at fault. Whether it was Akbar for completely forgetting what he was supposed to do, or if Horner just didn't feed for him properly. He goes to whip the General off the ropes, and on his way back, Horner is supposed to give Akbar a punch to the gut, and I guess Akbar would sell it by immediately falling over. What happened was, Horner goes to give him the punch, and Akbar continues to run forward, and then he stops. He does a very weird clutch to his ribcage, and then he takes a comically over-the-top bump onto his ass. I watched it like 10 times. I couldn't figure out what the hell he was trying to do, but it was quite entertaining. And, of course, the rest of his offense is clubbing blows and kicks. So there's not a whole lot to talk about. That is until we get to the finish, and Akbar wins with a camel clutch. He could still do that move properly. As we found out after the break, that match was 2 minutes and 10 seconds from bell to bell. And, boy, is that kind of telling. The fact that Akbar couldn't get through a 2-minute match without visibly fucking something up. The question, however, could Buck Robley beat the clock? By defeating another stellar underneath opponent of great fame and fortune, Kelly Kiniski. Yeah. The black hole of charisma that was Gene Kiniski's son. We've seen Kelly make a few sporadic appearances on Dallas. Even by 1984, he's just sort of a regular enhancement guy. Here in 82, same deal. I did laugh too, as Akbar's trying to put him over and talk about how he's the son of a former world's champion. And I'm just like, dude, you're really grasping at straws right now. It's Kelly fucking Kiniski. He lasted like, what, 3 years in the business before he retired? Don't even try. So anyway, here's your story payoff. They ring the bell. Robley gives Kiniski a dropkick into Akbar, who takes a bump out to the floor. And then Robley drops the loaded cast onto Kiniski for the immediate 3 count. What did they say, 25 seconds in total? At which point, as Akbar tries to snag the money away from the official Alfred Neely. Robley and Akbar get into a tug of war over the bills until Robley hits a somewhat successful atomic drop onto Akbar. He then dumps him out to the floor again in the most gentle way you can possibly dispose of somebody onto a hardwood canvas. It's the old cornyism about the modern workers trying to work with a Japanese Fabergé egg. The levels Buck went into making sure that he did not hurt the General here. What is the gentlest way I can set this man down without breaking his spinal column? I will make sure to be very blatant about it. And then Buck grabs the money, which has now been sprawled all about the ring, and then he walks off with it. And the General was so mad that he stomped up and down in the air and shook his fists. He did not try to pursue him. He did not try to confront him. He just stood on the floor and went, "Urgh." And it's funny because, I alluded to it earlier how this was a story episodic-driven TV angle. This whole thing probably went like 3 minutes of combined television time. But still, the people popped when Robley got the W. I don't really know what the point of it was. Unless it's to set up Kamala's TV debut in a couple weeks where he comes in and kills Buck Robley to get the General's money back. Yeah, something tells me we haven't seen the last of this program. The General may be the one to get the last laugh. But we will see. So then we had a Mid-South Tag title match. Now that the belts have been rightfully restored to the champions, Mr. Olympia and JYD. Well, they have the belts back. And they are here this week to defend them against the one-man gang. And Killer Khan. And I was trying to think, what's worse? JYD's canned WWE Network theme music or Killer Khan's wrestling? They're both equally horrible. I think Khan's ring work may be worse. Honestly, in conjunction with Gang and Dog, he was probably only the second worst worker in the match behind Dog. The match was what it was. Very simple tag formula. It's one of those rare occasions in wrestling where you had two giant baby faces that were somehow still both equally smaller than the heels. So they actually made for good baby faces in peril. Gang and Khan worked over Olympia. Things kind of broke down at the end with Khan going for a second rope knee drop, but Olympia rolled out of the way. Olympia did the hokey crawl through the leg spot to Gang where he had to pretend like he couldn't just reach under him and grab him by the foot to pull him back. And while Dog is running wild with the hot tag, they end up doing a spot where Dog tries to whip Gang toward the ropes. The problem was that he threw him directly toward Mr. Olympia, who was standing right in the line of fire. So not only did Gang basically squash Olympia in the ropes, but then Olympia had to pretend like it did not happen, thus risking a potential burial. The finish was a total mess, but JYD ended up hitting Gang with the thumper, which got a huge reaction. And it was an impressive feat of strength, hitting a big 400-plus pound lunker with a modified power slam. Even for JYD, that takes a lot of core strength. They advertised this as the featured main event for the week. Basically talking about how if there was any TV time left after this one, they would be pitching to standby matches. So I was thinking before they rang the bell, I'm like, they got plenty of TV time left. Maybe they'll give this one some time. Probably went like 5 or 6 minutes, if that. Just sort of an easy way to give the babyface champions a win. Beating Akbar's team clean was an interesting call, considering how they're hyping up Kamala's run. It's kind of strange to see them beating Akbar's Devastation Inc. so close to that debut. But it was what it was. It's 4 big lumbering guys. I mean, what you get is what you get. It's not going to be an athletic showcase. You know, talk about the Bill Watts form of wrestling, what he perceived as the actual athletes in the business. You know, this is still when he was pushing moderately huge guys. It was honestly on the same level as how Vince used to view modern wrestling, pushing all the big guys and kind of sticking to that. Now, obviously, Bill Watts would modify that business mentality later on, but yeah, he was still kind of very grassroots at this point. He was all about the big 300-pound meaty men. Just his business philosophy at the time, but some things change, some things don't. Bill Watts was willing to adapt. Vince, not so much. But from there, we go to our first of 2 standbys. This one was the Grappler versus Mr. Wrestling 2. And this actually has some story context based on the angle they shot last week, where after the Grappler squash, Wrestling 2 ran down to chase him off and call attention to the fact that he was clearly an imitation. So they go to settle beef this week. And the deal here was that the fans obviously knew that this was not the real Grappler. So they chanted, "We want the Grappler," pretty extensively. He's also still got the Wrestling 2 mask on, which is why the original Wrestling 2 took issue with him. So you had to figure the mask would somehow come into play. Wrestling 2 tried to reveal that last week, but to no avail. So while he's making the comeback on the Grappler, he goes to pry the mask off one more time, but they both inadvertently bump Alfred Neely out to the floor, which then prompts a decoy Grappler to hit the ring and try to run interference. And he tries to load up and give Wrestling 2 a series of knee lifts. And, well, let's just call it like it is. Mr. Wrestling 2 basically no-sold 2 of his own finisher being given to him. Also, he could fire back on both grapplers until Neely caught fact that, hey, there are 2 grapplers in the ring. And that is when he called for the DQ. The man's jaw must be made of steel, in addition to his powerful knee, to take 2 running knee attacks to the face, only to then fire up less than 15 seconds later. It's quite impressive. This fake Grappler did not clearly scout Wrestling 2 tapes long enough to know the proper technique. So the joke is on him. But that keeps the story moving along here as we continue to uncover the fake Grappler in Mid-South Wrestling. What is his mysterious identity? Who is cosplaying? Well, I guess we'll find out later on. And then the final standby match was Iron Mike Sharp versus Larry Clark, which I really didn't have much to talk about, other than Larry Clark's chicken legs. But Sharp won with a pile driver in under a minute. I think this might have been quicker than the Skandar Akbar squash, now that I look back. I mean, Bill Watts mainly used that as a precursor so he could pluck some video footage they had on tap, in the case that match went short. Evidently it did. So we got to see some highlights of the Mongolian Stomper from the Florida region. He was being managed by Don Carson at the time. I'm not sure from what time frame the footage was taken, but it's got to be the late 70s, because was Stomper still in Florida by the 80s? I thought he was mostly in Stampede Wrestling by that point. I mean, he had been around for a while, too. He was like 20-something years into the business by now. But the selling point was that Watts was putting over the fact that he was also making his way to the Mid-South region. To my recollection, I don't know if that ends up happening past maybe a week or two. I have like no memories of the Mongolian Stomper ever coming to Mid-South. Now, I talked about how I'm a little hairy about my timeline in 1982 for Mid-South Wrestling. I just like started diving into the footage, but it wasn't stuff that I had ingrained in my memory. Maybe he sticks around for a long stretch, but certainly by 83, I don't remember seeing any Mongolian Stomper in Mid-South. Probably another one of those things where he pops in for a cup of coffee and then you never see him again. Well, you know, for some guys, it was in and out of the territory. They would make their rounds and then come back in maybe 3 months to a year. But, yeah, that was how they rounded out the show this week. A lot of activity going on. But again, you know, more wrestling focus than anything. Mostly kept everything in the ring this week. You know, a couple promos here and there, but it was very wrestling-centric this go-around. The Buck Robley General Akbar story material was the main takeaway. And this was still when Akbar's Devastation Inc. was heavily pushed on TV. So you have to figure that $1,000 deal is only a way to launch the program into the next chapter. But again, very easy show to watch. Very enjoyable. They packed a lot of stuff here, but nothing felt rushed or out of place. If you really think about it too, that's probably the best compliment you can ever give a wrestling program. Even when they pack in a lot of content in a small window, but you still don't get the impression that it was overkill. It seemed like they covered a lot of ground this week, but in actuality, if you look back, it was just a handful of squashes, cool little TV angle with Akbar and Buck Robley, and a few video packages, hyping up some upcoming debuts. I mean, roster rotation was pretty constant during this period, so guys were in and out. A lot of fluctuation, a lot of overturn, and that's fine. But they kept things moving. And trust me, this is only the beginning. Wait until you see where things would go in the next year or two. If you think the show's good now, you're in for a real treat. And that keeps things rolling as we move into World Class. I think I need to start using some Slipknot references. Keep rolling, 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 rolling. Oh shit, that's not Slipknot. That's Limp Bizkit, right? Oh, whatever. It all sounds so similar. I wanted to use that as a transition into the World Class reviews because it's kind of fitting with where we are in the tape library. Things just kind of roll along from show to show, as has been the case since, well, I hate to even go there, but David's death back in February of this year. They've been through some ups and downs. You know, just recently, I think they've started to gain some of their traction back. Some of the storylines have moved forward. They seem less narrowly focused. They're willing to take some risks again. Man, but even in the case of the way Bill Mercer opened the show, like he's hyping the main event, is Gino Hernandez versus Kerry Von Erich. And I'm pretty sure his exact quote after running that match down was, "That's it. That's the main event." As if he was trying to elaborate, but then he realized he had nothing more to say because it's Gino versus Kerry. I mean, we've seen that match how many times? And I think Gino's run the entire Von Erich family gauntlet by now. I think Bill was taking on the role of me. Yep. Gino versus Kerry. It sure is. And we've probably seen some combination of that match how many times? Well, you're going to get it again. And even prior to seeing it, in the back of my mind, I already knew it was going to be 1,000 times better than Gino versus Mike. Almost any combination of Gino versus fill-in-the-blank babyface would be better. So, wait, did I skip something? Oh, no, I didn't. I just forgot about the Encore presentation this week. Well, normally I don't write much down about those because they're typically matches or segments we've already previously recapped. The one they aired here, I think this one dates back a while. This was like a summer angle they shot back in June or July from what I remember. Do y'all remember the name Chick Donovan? Yeah, there's a name we haven't heard on TV in quite some time. Well, the last time I remember covering Chick on TV, it was the hospital pre-tape with Kevin after they had already shot the angle with him and Killer Khan. And this is where they showed the initial heat angle where Khan targeted Chick's knee and then put him on the shelf. I don't know if I ever talked much about the reason for why they shot the angle. My presumption is that it was done to write Chick off the show for a while so you could actually go through with a legit knee operation. I don't remember what the issue was at the time, but I mean, he's been gone for a while. So I figured the angle wasn't just done to get heat on Khan. I mean, I'm thinking Chick was actually intending on getting surgery done. But, yeah. Going quite a ways back for that one. I almost forgot about it. It happened so long ago. Even though it was probably like, 2 or 3 months? But coming out of that, the first official match on TV, Gentleman Chris Adams versus Coco Ware. Singles action for the PYTs. With Coco sporting the urine-stained yellow tights for the occasion. And, well, it's weird. You look at the two individuals involved, you think, wow, this should be a hell of a match. It was aight. It's probably the best I can give it. They just kind of had a very paint-by-numbers routine wrestling match. If you copy and pasted the majority of TV matches we were recapping in World Class since 1982, I'd say about 85% of them would fall into the category of this one. Babyface flurry from Chris early on. Lots of mat holds and technical work. They eventually have Coco cut him off and get some heat for a few minutes. And then Chris makes a valiant comeback and gets the win with his move. Even the setup to the finish was kind of what the fuck. I'm not making this up either. Coco hits Adams with a vertical suplex. He goes up top to try to hit some high-risk move. And I don't even know what this was. I can't even say Gary Hart distracted Coco. Coco just sort of stopped what he was doing because Gary was bad-mouthing him from the floor. He was like, "Don't you do it, Coco. Don't you come down off that top rope." And then Coco just got down to yell at Hart. And then Adams took advantage and hit him with a super kick for the 3 count. I mean, at least I can defend it as the heel being stupid. But, that was a rather lame finish. So basically the story is, Coco Ware would have won had it not been for Gary Hart yelling at him for attempting to hit a perfectly legal move. Which again is why I'm starting to think that Chris Adams' heel turn is not too far out. Because whatever relationship is currently going on with him and Gary Hart, it's a weird one. This finish kind of made Coco the sympathetic babyface. And even if that was done indirectly, Gary did essentially run a distraction. It just wasn't as blatant. This is a weird, strange dynamic. The whole Chris Adams-Gary Hart pairing. But they are slow burn building that for all it's worth. And then moving on to the next deal here. We had a pre-taped interview with the Iceman and Skip Young, a.k.a. Sweet Brown Sugar. And Very short and sweet to the point. Listening to King Parsons cut promos is always an experience. I just couldn't get over the visual of him standing there with a sweatband on. Meanwhile, the majority of his head is completely bald, except for the 3 or 4 dreadlocks he had braided all the way back. So goofy looking. And man, the stark contrast between him and Skip. Like, Iceman's there talking about how he and Sugar are going to shuck it and jive it like 2 cool cats. And then there's Skip Young in a 3-piece suit, being the serious one and running down the pretty young things. He hyped a match with Norvell Austin for next week. So there's your second PYT singles match upcoming. I also did write this down as a quote because it was quite amazing. This is from Skip Young. Norvell, you better give your soul to the Lord because your blank is coming home with me. And I did not use that as a placeholder term. He actually said the word blank as if someone handed him a pre-recorded message or line and he forgot to come up with a term of his own. So he just went with the stage cue. Your blank is coming home with me. Huh. He censored himself. Great. So those two walk off. And here comes Kerry for his half of the interview. And his stuff is all centered around the ongoing Gino Stella May baby doll saga. Right. I guess not baby doll in this case. It's Nicole Roberts, a.k.a. Lady Giant, as she was referred to here in World Class. And among some of Kerry's stellar quotes here, I love this one. Gino's apparently got a new bodyguard known as the Lady Giant. Well, that's fine. He can bring whatever lady he wants with him, but I don't think ladies belong in the ring to begin with. Kerry Von Erich, thinking about 30 steps ahead of the curb. God, if only he were alive to see the Divas Revolution in WWE. He'd be having a fucking field day. If someone told Kerry in 1984, did you know that the women would be main eventing WrestleMania in about 22 or 23 years? He'd have quit the business. That would have been it. It's funny though, because in the same breath, after he mentions how women don't belong in wrestling, then he turns around and talks about how Stella Mae French is more man than Gino could ever hope to be. Not necessarily in those words, but I mean, he basically said that Stella can easily beat the crap out of Gino anytime she wants. Either that or she'll run him down in her pickup truck. But Kerry just said that if Lady Giant's going to be watching Gino's back from now on, and Kerry's going to make sure he has Stella on standby. This is all highly more interesting than the Missing Link versus Mike Gallagher, by the way. Here's everything you need to know about it. Aside from the simple fact that it sucked, that goes without saying, it's a Missing Link squash. My notes read as follows. Link does a bunch of headbutts and wonky boots. Bill Mercer admires his extra chromosome. Link wins with a Benoit-inspired top rope headbutt in a 5-minute match that went 5 minutes too long. Just remove the wow factor of the way Benoit used to actually hit the top rope headbutt. Link just sort of fell forward and dropped his head, like he'd been shot in the back with a gun. Now, I was actually thinking about writing here as a sidebar. Link gives Gallagher a head for the win. But then I started having flashbacks to Al Snow, and I decided against it. But that's pretty much what happened. Link gave Gallagher a head for the pinfall. Yeah, this was dick. What was not dick, however, was the pre-tape that happened afterwards with Gino and Lady Giant. This is all kinds of awesome. First of all, it must be noted, Mark Lorenz has to be one of the most incredibly lackluster on-screen personalities in wrestling history. Like, there's a balance between subdued and serious and Mark Lorenz. If I were to say he was lethargic, that's probably still giving him too much credit. But here's the thing. He's not bad. He's just like low energy. Like he's interacting with Gino here, and it's like, it's a total yin-yang situation. Gino's got loads of charisma and personality. Meanwhile, Mark is just very nonchalant. Of course, Gino's there with Lady Giant, Nicole Roberts. They're rocking the white convertible here. Gino's decked out in a full suit. I think I mentioned last week, Baby Doll's leather jacket phase in the wrestling business. It is quite the unique look. Not really the type of girl that I would want to interact with on a daily basis, but hey, to each his own. Maybe Gino was just looking for a quick lay. I think this was before she met Sam Houston, right? Anyway, so they're cutting the promo on Stella, talking about how Gino is untouchable with Lady Giant watching his back. If I'm not mistaken, I think he referred to her as Nicola Roberts. It's still interesting to hear them refer to her as Andrea. I'm confused. Was it Nicole Andrea and then followed by Lady Giant? Or am I missing a step here? I mean, I think I prefer Baby Doll much more. Although looking at her getup in 1984 as compared to where she was in Crockett Promotions, maybe Baby Doll wasn't too fitting at the time. But really nothing much else to it. It was great because Gino's cutting the promo. I mean, the actual content was fairly simple. And then Baby Doll tries to chime in with like one or two thoughts, and Gino just cuts her off deadpan. He very quickly picked up on the fact that she was not a good promo. I mean, he all but said, shut up, sit there, look pretty, and let me do the talking. And of course, that tied in with the main event for the week. Gino Hernandez versus Kerry Von Erich. By the way, I think this is where I first recognized the giant red streak in Baby Doll's hair. And it's not even like it was done to be any sort of highlight. It just looked like somebody dumped a giant bucket of red paint on her head. Either that or she was practicing her blading jobs on the floor. The dog collar was also an odd fit. Just wanted to throw that in there. So anyways, Gino versus Kerry. The match is what you would expect out of the two men involved. I mean, by the time we got to the actual angle at the end, you'll sort of be able to tell what the issue was with the overall idea of the match. But it did not take long for the Dallas faithful to start a "We Want Stella" chant. Those roared through the building. And they're going back and forth. Gino would stall every now and then, but for the most part, the action was in the ring. I did like the spot later on, as Kerry applied the Iron Claw to Gino. His method of breaking the hold was by simply thumbing Kerry in the eye. I was like, holy shit. They found the Achilles heel. After all these years, someone finally found the way to break the claw. Just thumb the fucker in the eye. That'll break the hold immediately. No one ever thought of that until just then. And fast forward about 2 minutes, Kerry's able to get Gino in a bear hug position, which prompts Stella to make her way down the aisleway to start stalking, I keep writing down Baby Doll in my notes. I gotta stop doing that. It's Andrea, Lady Giant, whatever we're calling her. Anyway, so Stella just sort of meanders into the ring, as she's been prone to do during the majority of her run-ins. And after Carrie and Gino are trading spots, Gino just sort of launches Carrie over the top rope to the floor for the blatant DQ. To which I ask, so what was the point of the Stella run-in? I have no clue. But you got the biggest pop of the match. It's kind of what I was alluding to a minute ago. I mean, once Stella came out, Bill Mercer all but said the quiet part out loud. Well, clearly the women have overshadowed the men. Touché. And, of course, the post-match angle is Stella and Andrea having their face-off. And the boys, by that point, were just sort of background players. I mean, to be fair, this is not really unsung news. The idea that the women would become more substantial than the two men involved in the program. And we literally saw the same thing happen with Chris Adams and Jimmy Garvin. Precious and Sunshine were the two key factors that made that feud work. By the end, nobody gave a shit about Garvin or Adams. They just wanted to see the women rip each other's hair out. Of course, when Stella showed up and started targeting Jimmy, she became the sole highlight of those segments. It's funny how that reverse psychology works. Like these days, you can't get the average hardcore fan to give two fucks about women's wrestling. Meanwhile, in Dallas in 1984, God, the girls ended up being the sole focus a lot of the time. They get the biggest reactions. Their segments get over. It's crazy how that works. But, well, that was more or less the show in a nutshell. It was fine. You know, another middle-of-the-road world-class episode that's probably skippable if you're looking for big matches or big promo segments to check out. Nothing of real substance happened. I mean, the main event was inferior to the angle with the girls. The Adams-Coco match was fun for a while it lasted. And, yeah, the pre-tapes were entertaining, but in terms of, like, major story advancement, it was just not a lot here. You get your obligatory piss break with the missing link squash, and that saves you about 5 minutes. Again, though, you know, very simple episode to watch. So, there you have that. And that rounds out this one. Again, appreciate everybody that stops by to check out the show every week. Just like I talked about at the beginning, make sure you subscribe, comment, like the program, or like the show, whatever. And let me look at it here. WWE has a pay-per-view coming up, correct? Sorry, I'm just going to the wiki page real quick to see. October 7th, Fastlane. Yeah, that show's coming up. Well, it's still a couple weeks out, though, so we can pre-plan for that one. I got to figure out how I want to modify that, because that might be another one of those shows where we leave out the SmackDown report, because we're putting the NXT review series on the Monday shows now, so it's quickly filling up with content again. I just don't want to overextend myself, but we'll see. So, you have that to look forward to. Until then, this coming Monday, we'll have SmackDown, we'll have Retro Raw, and we'll have NXT. And that'll keep us preoccupied for the time being. So, hope everybody's okay with the new formatting of the show. Sorry if you're not, but it is what it is. So, take care, everybody, and peace out.